are places in this world that geography cannot explain. There are coordinates on the map that seem to bleed, festering wounds in the fabric of reality where the barrier between the living and the dead has been worn paper-thin by centuries of trauma. We like to believe that our homes are our sanctuaries, fortresses of brick and mortar designed to keep the night at bay. But what happens when the foundation itself is the source of the terror? What happens when the house you save from demolition decides that it wants to keep you, not as a tenant, but as a prisoner? Welcome to Nocturnal Ledger. Tonight, we are not merely recounting a ghost story. We are opening a file that has baffled historians, terrified clergymen, and broken the minds of skeptics for decades. We are traveling to the sleepy market town of Wotton-under-Edge in Gloucestershire, England. There, sitting crooked and ancient on a patch of uneven ground, lies the ancient Ram Inn. This building, dating back to the year 1145, is widely considered the most haunted house in the British Isles, and perhaps the world. This is not a legend born of internet rumors. This is a documented history of child sacrifice, pagan rituals, and a malevolence so profound that even the church refused to intervene. This is the true story of the darkness that dwells within the Ram. To understand the horror of the ancient Ram Inn, we must look far beyond its timber frames and creaking floorboards. We must look at the earth itself. Long before the first stone of the inn was laid in the 12th century, the land was already stained. Historical records and geographical surveys confirm that the inn sits directly upon the intersection of two ancient ley lines. These represent lines of energy that connect megalithic sites, in this case, stretching all the way to Stonehenge. For thousands of years, this specific plot of land was a pagan burial ground. It was a place where the barrier between worlds was manipulated, rituals were conducted, and blood was spilled to appease old, hungry gods. When the ancient Ram Inn was constructed in 1145, it was intended to be a church house, a residence for priests and slaves who were constructing the nearby St. Mary's Church. It is a cruel irony that a building made to house the holy was erected on soil saturated with the unholy. The builders, perhaps unknowingly, or perhaps with arrogant intention, diverted a natural stream to flow directly beneath the foundation of the house. In occult lore, running water acts as a conduit for spiritual energy, a battery that charges the atmosphere. By trapping this water beneath the stone and timber, they created a perfect storm. They built a containment vessel for the spirits of the pagan dead, and for things much older and darker than human spirits. For centuries, the inn operated, witnessing the slow march of history. It saw the plague, the witch trials, and the rise and fall of kings. But the true documentation of its horror begins in the modern era, specifically in 1968. This is where the story shifts from folklore to a verified, terrifying case study of one man's battle against the abyss. His name was John Humphries. In the late 60s, the ancient Ram Inn was derelict, a rotting husk destined for the wrecking ball. John, a man with a deep appreciation for history, purchased the property for a mere £2,600, determined to save it. He had no idea that he was signing a contract, not just for a deed, but for his own life. On his very first night in the house, the dormant forces within the Ram woke up. John had set up a makeshift bed in the middle of the drafty, renovation-filled house. The silence of the Gloucestershire countryside was heavy, the kind of silence that presses against your eardrums. As he drifted off to sleep, he was jolted awake by a sensation that would haunt him for the next 50 years. He was not alone. The air in the room had turned freezing, a localized drop in temperature that caused his breath to mist in the darkness. Then, a hand, invisible but undeniably physical, grabbed his arm. It wasn't a gentle touch. It was a vice-like grip, cold and forceful. John was dragged from his bed across the rough floorboards. He scrambled, fighting against an opponent he couldn't see, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. The force threw him across the room. As he lay there, bruised and terrified, he realized the house was watching him. Most men would have fled. Most men would have put the sign back up and sold the property to the next unsuspecting fool. But John Humphries was stubborn. He decided to stay. He decided to protect the house. And in return, the house decided to torment him. Over the next few decades, until his death in 2017, John Humphries cataloged a litany of horrors that defies belief. He lived in the Ram alone, his wife and daughters having fled the property, unable to withstand the oppressive atmosphere. His daughters verified these accounts, speaking of a childhood marred by the sight of hanging objects swinging on their own, the sound of heavy footsteps pacing empty corridors, and the terrifying manifestation of shadow people. One of the most chilling discoveries John made was physical proof of the land's dark past. During renovations, he broke through the concrete of the floor near the central fireplace. Underneath, buried in the compacted earth, he found evidence that turned his stomach. He unearthed the skeletal remains of children. These were not formal burials. The bones were jagged, broken, and accompanied by a rusted, iron dagger. Forensic analysis and historical context suggest a ritual sacrifice. It is believed that during the darker centuries, perhaps even predating the inn, children were sacrificed on this spot to alter the energy of the Ley Lines or to grant power to those practicing the dark arts. John, in a move that many paranormal experts criticized, disturbed these remains. He removed the dagger. It is said that the moment the dagger was pulled from the earth, a scream echoed through the house, audible only to him, and the activity in the inn escalated from residual hauntings to violent, demonic attacks. The entities within the ancient Ram Inn are distinct, recurring, and documented by hundreds of visitors, paranormal investigators, and skeptics who left as believers. Let us walk through the house, room by room, into the anatomy of this nightmare. We begin in the bishop's room. This is widely considered the epicenter of the haunting. It is located on the first floor, a room with uneven floorboards and a low, oppressive ceiling. When you step inside, the air changes. It becomes thick, almost gelatinous. Visitors often report a sudden, splitting headache or an overwhelming wave of nausea. This was the room where John Humphries slept, and where he endured his most terrifying ordeals. It is here that the entity known as the Incubus and Succubus resides. In medieval demonology, these are sexual predators of the spirit world, demons that prey on sleeping humans. John reported countless nights where he was held down, paralyzed, unable to move or scream, while a heavy, unseen weight pressed upon his chest. He described the sensation of being sexually assaulted by a force that felt like static electricity and ice. This wasn't a nightmare. He would wake up with physical scratches, bruises, and a profound sense of violation. Guests who have dared to spend the night in the bishop's room have reported similar phenomena. They speak of the bed shaking violently, of being slapped awake, and of seeing a swirling black mass hovering above them, blocking out the moonlight. But the bishop's room holds more than just demons. It is also the domain of the monk. Witnesses have described seeing a figure in robes standing in the corner, head bowed. Unlike the aggressive demon, the monk seems to be a residual haunting, perhaps a former priest who lived there when it was a church house, forever trapped in a cycle of penance or guarding the room against the darker things that share the space. Moving down the crooked hallway, we come to the witch's room. This space is named after a local legend that historical records support. In the 1500s, during the height of the witch hysteria in England, a woman who sought refuge in the inn was captured. She was accused of witchcraft, not because she was evil, but because she did not conform to the religious strictures of the time. She was burned at the stake nearby. It is said her spirit fled back to the inn, the only place she felt safe. However, the safety was an illusion. The spirit in the witch's room is volatile. It is often accompanied by the manifestation of a large black cat. This is not a flesh and blood animal. It is a shadowy form that darts between the furniture, dissolving when looked at directly. John Humphries often spoke of the cat as a familiar, a guardian of the witch. Visitors in this room report an intense feeling of sorrow that quickly turns to rage. Equipment malfunctions constantly. Batteries drain in seconds. Cameras refuse to focus. It is as if the spirit within the room is screaming for justice, or perhaps screaming for everyone to get out. The architecture of the house itself seems designed to confuse and disorient. There is a staircase that leads to nowhere, walled off centuries ago. There are drafty corridors that smell of sulfur and rotting meat, smells that vanish as quickly as they appear. This olfactory phenomenon is a classic sign of demonic infestation. The scent of sulfur, often described as rotten eggs, has been reported by police officers who visited the property in response to break-in alarms, only to find the house empty and the smell overpowering. One of the most credible witnesses to the terror of the ancient Ram Inn was a man named Austin, a burly biker who didn't believe in ghosts. He visited the inn on a dare. He was a man of logic, a man who trusted his fists and the engine of his motorcycle. He later recounted his experience in a trembling voice. He was standing in the main hallway when he felt a massive pair of hands shove him. This was not a nudge. He was lifted off his feet and thrown against a wall with enough force to knock the wind out of him. He looked around, ready to fight his attacker, but the hallway was empty. The air was dead still. He fled the house that night and vowed never to return. His testimony is crucial because he had no prior knowledge of the inn's reputation. He was a blank slate, and the house wrote its terror upon him. The skepticism surrounding the Ram is natural. In an age of digital fabrication, it is easy to dismiss these claims as the ravings of a lonely old man or the hallucinations of suggestible tourists. However, the sheer volume of corroborating evidence is difficult to ignore. We are talking about police reports filed over decades. We are talking about the testimony of the former Bishop of Gloucester, the Right Reverend John Yates. When asked to perform an exorcism on the property, the bishop visited the inn. He did not stay long. He was reported to have turned pale, his composure cracking. He told John Humphries that the evil in the house was too ancient, too entrenched. He called it the most evil place I have ever been, and refused to return, advising John to leave immediately. When a high-ranking official of the church admits defeat in the face of a presence, it lends a terrifying gravity to the situation. The scientific community has also tried to debunk the RAM. They point to the high levels of electromagnetic fields, or EMF, generated by the nearby power station. It is a known fact that high EMF can cause hallucinations, paranoia, and the feeling of being watched. They argue that the ley lines are pseudoscience, and that the demons are manifestations of sleep paralysis. But this does not explain the physical evidence. It does not explain the scratches. It does not explain the objects moving on camera. It does not explain the voice phenomena recorded by investigators. Growls, whispers in archaic English, and screams that do not match the vocal range of a human being. One particularly disturbing piece of evidence involves a mummified cat found inside a wall cavity. For centuries, it was a custom to brick a cat up inside the walls of a new building to ward off evil spirits. When John found this desiccated corpse, rigid and dusty, he removed it. Almost immediately, the activity in the house spiked. It was as if a seal had been broken. The guardian was gone. The shadows lengthened. John eventually replaced the cat, tucking it back into its tomb in the wall, in a desperate attempt to restore some semblance of order. It was a macabre compromise with the supernatural. The psychological toll on John Humphries was immense. For 50 years, he lived in a state of siege. He slept with the lights on. He slept with a Bible on his chest. He became a recluse, obsessed with the entities that shared his home. Some say the house drove him mad. Others say his madness was the only thing that allowed him to survive. He became the keeper of the ram, the jailer of the monsters. He would often talk to the spirits, shouting at them, bargaining with them. It was a symbiotic relationship. The house needed him to acknowledge it, and he needed the house to validate his existence. When John passed away in 2017, the paranormal community held its breath. Would the haunting cease with the death of the primary observer? The answer, terrifyingly, is no. His daughter Caroline, who had fled the house in terror as a child, inherited the property. She now manages the inn, allowing investigators and brave souls to tour the location. She reports that the activity has not lessened. In fact, some say it has changed. The entities seem restless. The anchor is gone. Recent investigations have captured thermal images of small, childlike figures darting under the tables in the bar area. Audio recorders have picked up the sound of a baby crying in the attic, where no child has been for a century. The sensation of being watched is more aggressive. Visitors report being scratched within minutes of entering the bishop's room. The darkness is still there, and it is hungry. We must also consider the entity known as the Centurion. The ancient Ram Inn stands on a road that was once a major Roman route. Witnesses have reported seeing a translucent figure of a Roman soldier on horseback, riding through the walls of the kitchen. This suggests that the haunting is not just layered in the house, but in the time-space of the location itself. The house is a window, a cracked lens looking back into a violent past. The Centurion does not interact with the living. He simply rides, a recording of a moment in time played on an endless loop. This contrasts sharply with the malevolent intelligence of the Incubus or the witch, suggesting that the ram is a container for different types of supernatural phenomena, residual energy, intelligent hauntings, and demonic infestation. The question remains, why here? Why this specific cluster of timber and stone? Theories abound. Some say the diversion of the water created a battery. Some say the child sacrifices opened a portal that can never be closed. Others believe that the limestone bedrock acts as a recording tape, trapping the emotional intensity of the tragedy that occurred here. But perhaps the answer is simpler and more terrifying. Perhaps there are just places in the world that are bad. Places where the light does not reach. As we analyze the accounts of those who have spent the night, a pattern emerges. The fear is not just visual, it is visceral. It attacks the mind. Witnesses report sudden, irrational urges to hurt themselves or others. They report a draining of their life force, leaving the inn exhausted and physically ill. This aligns with the theory of a vampiric entity, something that feeds on fear and biological energy. The more people visit, the more fear they bring, and the stronger the entities become. By turning the ancient Ram Inn into a tourist destination, we may be feeding the very beast we are trying to study. Let us return to the children. The bones found under the staircase are the grim anchor of this story. Historical context tells us that paganism in this region was deeply rooted. The transition to Christianity was violent and bloody. It is entirely plausible that a sect, desperate to maintain the old ways, performed the ultimate sacrifice to consecrate the ground against the encroaching church. The dagger found with the bones was broken. A ritualistic practice meant to kill the weapon so it could serve the dead in the afterlife. The spirits of these children are believed to be the weeping sounds heard in the dead of night. They are the innocents, trapped in the crossfire of a spiritual war that has lasted for 900 years. Imagine standing in that house tonight. The electricity has been cut, leaving you in the suffocating darkness of the countryside. The wind howls through the gaps in the 12th century window frames. You hear a creak on the stairs. It's a heavy step, wood groaning under weight. But you know you are the only one in the building. The smell of sulfur fills your nose. The temperature drops 10 degrees in a second. You feel the static rise on your arms. And then, from the corner of the room, from the deepest shadow, you hear a whisper. It doesn't ask who you are. It tells you to get out. This is the reality of the ancient Ram Inn. It is not a theme park attraction. It is a scar on the face of the earth. It is a testament to the fact that history does not die. It waits. It waits in the walls, in the floorboards, and in the cold earth beneath our feet. John Humphries spent his life trying to understand the nature of the beast he lived with. He never found a definitive answer, only more questions and more fear. He died a guardian of a gateway he couldn't close. Now, the ledger is passed to us. We document, we observe, and we wonder. As you lay in your bed tonight, in the safety of your modern home, take a moment to listen. Listen to the settling of the house. Listen to the wind outside. Is it just the wind? Or is it the echo of something ancient? Something that has been waiting for you to notice it? The ancient Ram Inn is thousands of miles away for most of us, but the darkness it represents has no borders. Reality is a fragile thing. All it takes is one shift, one drop in temperature, one shadow that moves against the light, to remind us that we are guests in a world we do not fully understand. This has been a file from the Nocturnal Ledger. The story of the ancient Ram Inn is far from over. In fact, for the entities that walk its halls, the night is just beginning. Sleep well, if you can.